The sky over the frontier world burned with dull red light as if the planet itself was wounded. Smoke covered the cities and drifted across broken towers and cracked roads. The war had been going on for many cycles, and no one remembered what peace felt like anymore. Every alarm sounded the same now. Tired and hopeless Jisoo stood inside the command shelter, staring at a damaged holo display. Lines flickered and vanished as systems failed one by one. She had been a strategist once, trained to think many steps ahead, but now there were no steps left to plan. Only the present moment remained, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the ground shook as enemy artillery struck the outer districts. Each impact sent dust falling from the ceiling. Soldiers flinched but did not run. They were past fear. Fear required energy, and energy was gone. Tae-hyun leaned against a metal support beam nearby. His uniform was torn, and dried blood darkened his sleeve. He ignored the pain in his side and focused on the people moving through the shelter. Civilians, wounded fighters, and technicians crowded together in silence. Some prayed in their own ways. Others simply stared at the floor. The alliance had been strong once. Many species had joined together, believing numbers and unity would be enough. They were wrong. The enemy had come with fleets larger than anyone expected, weapons faster than any defense, and a patience that crushed hope slowly instead of all at once. Reports continued to arrive, though fewer every hour. The northern defense line had fallen. The orbital cannons were silent. The last supply depot had been overrun. Each message felt like another door closing. Jisoo finally turned away from the display. Her voice was steady, even though her hands trembled. She gave short orders, not because she believed they would change the outcome, but because order itself was a form of resistance. If the end was coming, it would not come to chaos. Tae-hyun moved closer to her. He spoke quietly so others would not hear. The evacuation ships would never launch. The enemy controlled the sky. Everyone knew it, but no one said it aloud. Saying it would make it real. Beyond the shelter, the city cried out in distant echoes. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread unchecked. The air smelled of burning metal and something worse. The defenders fought in small groups now, cut off and surrounded, holding streets that no longer mattered. Far above the planet, the last Allied station drifted in pieces. It had been the symbol of their unity, and now it was nothing more than debris glowing faintly as it burned up in the atmosphere. Many saw it fall, and something inside them broke with it. The enemy broadcast their victory openly. Their message filled every remaining channel. It was calm and certain, promising mercy in exchange for surrender. No one believed it. The enemy had never shown mercy before. Jisoo listened to the broadcast with a blank expression. She had studied the enemy for years. She knew their patterns. This was the final stage. The moment when resistance was expected to end. Tae-hyun gathered the remaining officers. There were not many left. Some were barely able to stand. He told them to protect the civilians as long as possible. Not to win, but to delay. Delay had become the highest goal. As hours passed, the shelter shook more often. Power failed in sections, plunging rooms into darkness. Emergency lights cast long shadows that made everyone look older and smaller. Children clung to parents. Parents pretended to be brave. Jisoo moved through the crowd, offering words that felt thin but necessary. She stopped beside a young technician who stared at a broken console in shock. She placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he had done well. The words mattered. Even if the future did not. At last, only one option remained. A final distress call. The Alliance had already sent dozens over the months, but this one would be different. It would carry no codes, no politics, no promises. Only Truth.Jisoo and Tae-Hyon stood together, the old transmitter. It was outdated and unstable, but it still worked. Barely. The message would scatter into the dark between stars. Weak and easy to miss. They argued quietly about the words. Not about strategy, but about meaning. Should they ask for help, or simply say goodbye? In the end, Jisoo chose simplicity. She believed simple truth traveled farther than desperate speeches. The message was sent. It spoke of a world under attack, of civilians trapped, of a defense that was failing. It did not name enemies or offer rewards. It ended with a single line asking if anyone could hear them. When the transmitter went silent, the shelter felt emptier than before. The message was gone, and with it, the last action they could take. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. No reply came. No signal returned. Space remained silent, vast and uncaring. The enemy ground forces advanced. Their footsteps echoed through ruined streets. Explosions grew closer. The shelter doors shook as impacts struck nearby. Tae-Hyon took his place near the entrance, weapon in hand. He knew it would not be enough. Still, he stood straight. Around him, other soldiers followed his example. Jisoo watched them and felt a deep, quiet sorrow. Not for herself, but for what the galaxy was losing without ever knowing it. Cultures, stories, lives, all fading without witness. As the first enemy breach charges were set against the outer wall, Jisoo closed her eyes for a moment. She did not pray for victory. She prayed that someone, somewhere, had heard the call. Above the burning world, the stars watched in silence. Hope was nearly gone, and the end felt close enough to touch. Silence followed the distress call, heavy and unmoving. It pressed down on everyone inside the shelter like a physical weight. No lights blinked in response. No distant signal returned. Space remained dark and empty. Jisoo kept her eyes on the dead transmitter longer than necessary. A part of her had expected something impossible, an instant answer, a sign that the universe cared. When nothing happened, she slowly stepped back and let the technicians power the system down to save the last energy reserves. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. The enemy had stopped bombing from afar. They were advancing carefully now, certain of victory. Their machines moved through the ruined streets with steady purpose, crushing debris under heavy feet. Tae-Hyon walked among the defenders, speaking to each group. His voice was calm, even kind. He told them where to stand, when to fall back, how to protect the civilians behind them. He did not speak of survival. Everyone understood that word no longer applied. The shelter lights dimmed again as another power relay failed. Emergency lamps cast pale white circles across the floor. Shadows stretched along the walls, making the room feel smaller and tighter. Civilians were moved deeper underground. Old tunnels once meant for storage were now filled with families huddled together. Some children cried softly until exhaustion claimed them. Others stared in silence, too tired even for fear. Jisoo knelt beside an elderly man who struggled to breathe. Medical supplies were nearly gone. She adjusted his mask and stayed with him until his breathing slowed. When it stopped, she closed his eyes gently and moved on. There was no time for grief. Enemy broadcasts continued, repeating the same message in different tones. Sometimes calm, sometimes mocking. They spoke of inevitability and order. They promised that resistance only caused unnecessary loss. The defenders turned the sound off whenever possible. Hours passed in fragments. A hallway collapse blocked one route. A fire broke out in another section. Each problem was handled quickly, without panic. There was a strange peace in knowing the end was near. Tae-Hyon checked his weapon and counted his remaining ammunition. The number was low, but enough to stand for a while. He looked at the soldiers near him. They were different species, different sizes, different worlds. In this moment, those differences no longer mattered. A loud impact shook the outer wall. Dust poured from the ceiling. The enemy had reached the shelter perimeter. Jisoo felt the vibration through the floor and steadied herself against a console. She thought of the world before the war, of open skies and crowded streets. She wondered if any record of those days would survive. The first breach attempt failed when a hidden charge collapsed part of the tunnel. Cheers rose briefly, weak but real. For a few minutes, hope flickered again, small and fragile dot. Then the enemy adjusted. Their machines cut through reinforced barriers with ease. Defensive turrets overheated and went dark. One by one, the shelter's outer layers were peeled away. Tae-hyun ordered a controlled retreat to the inner chambers. The defenders fell back slowly, firing when necessary, conserving strength. Every step backward felt like surrender, but it was the only choice left. Jisoo helped move data cores into a protected vault. They contained history, science, and culture from many worlds. If nothing else survived, these records might. She sealed the vault and marked its location, hoping someone would find it one day. As the enemy pushed closer, the air filled with smoke and the sharp scent of damaged machinery. Alarms wailed and then fell silent as systems failed completely. In the deepest chamber, the last civilians waited. There was nowhere left to go. Soldiers formed a final line at the entrance, standing shoulder to shoulder. Tae-hyun took his position at the center. He felt strangely calm. Fear had burned out, leaving only focus. He looked back once, meeting Jisoo's eyes. No words were needed. The enemy advanced into view, tall and armored, weapons glowing faintly. They moved without haste, confident and certain. Jisoo felt her heart sink. This was the moment the broadcasts had promised. The moment when resistance ended. She thought again of the distress call, of the simple message sent into the dark. She wondered if it had already faded into nothing, lost among stars that would never know this world had existed. Just as the enemy raised their weapons for the final advance, a deep vibration rolled through the ground. It was different from artillery. Lower, wider. Everyone froze. Another vibration followed, then another, as if the planet itself was responding. Dust fell from the ceiling in steady streams. Enemy units paused, their formations breaking slightly as their sensors reacted to something new. Jisoo felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She did not dare hope. She had learned what hope did to people. A distant sound echoed through the tunnels. Not an explosion, not a collapse, but a powerful, steady hum. It grew louder by the second. Tae-hyun frowned and adjusted his stance. He had never heard a sound like this before. It carried weight and intention. Enemy commanders shouted orders, their calm finally cracking. Their machines turned, scanning wildly. Then the shelter lights flared bright white as power surged through dead systems. Consoles sparked back to life. Displays flickered on, flooded with signals. Jisoo rushed to the nearest screen. Readings scrolled faster than she could follow. Energy spikes. Unknown signatures. Massive movement in orbit. Her breath caught. Above the ruined world, space itself seemed to bend. Sensors screamed warnings. The enemy fleet shifted formation, suddenly uncertain. No friendly identification codes appeared. No greetings were sent. Only raw presence. Jisoo whispered, barely aware she was speaking. Someone had answered. In the shelter, soldiers straightened. Civilians looked up. For the first time in many hours, silence returned, not with despair, but with waiting. Far above, something enormous was arriving, and the balance of the battle trembled. The sound grew stronger, filling the shelter with a deep, steady hum that seemed to pass through bone and stone alike. It was not violent, but it carried force, like a promise made by something very large and very sure. enemy soldiers hesitated. Their movements slowed as their systems struggled to understand what was happening. Some turned their weapons upward, as if instinct told them the real threat was no longer inside the tunnels. Jisoo stared at the screen as symbols stabilized into clear shapes. Massive objects were emerging from distorted space above the planet. Not dozens, not hundreds, fewer than expected, but each one was enormous. Ships unlike any she had ever studied. They were angular and dark, marked with simple symbols instead of glowing banners. Their hulls showed scars, not decoration. These were not ships built to impress. They were built to endure. The enemy fleet reacted late. Commands were shouted. Formations broke apart as targeting systems failed to lock properly. The newcomers had arrived too close, ignoring all standard engagement distance. Then space erupted with motion. Thin lines of light crossed the void, fast and precise. Enemy ships vanished in sudden flashes, not explosions, but clean breaks, as if cut apart by invisible blades. Others went dark, drifting helplessly. There was no warning message, no demand for surrender. They simply acted. Inside the shelter, power surged fully back online. Air filters restarted. Lights stabilized. A wave of quiet disbelief moved through the crowd. Taehyun watched the enemy soldiers near the entrance falter. Their confidence shattered. Some stepped back. Others froze where they stood, weapons lowered without realizing it. A new signal pushed through every channel, calm and clear. It was not translated at first, but its tone needed no translation. Then the words appeared on the screen. This is a human defense force. We have received your call. Jisoo felt her knees weaken. She gripped the console to stay upright. Around her, people whispered the unfamiliar word, human. The name carried little meaning to most of them, yet something in the way it was spoken felt solid. More lines followed. Hold your positions. We are deploying ground units. The shelter shook again, but this time the sound came from above, not around them. The enemy soldiers retreated suddenly, pulling back toward the tunnels, their formation broken. Moments later, a new sound echoed through the underground chambers. Heavy, rhythmic impacts, controlled, close. Taehyun raised his weapon, unsure what to expect. Then figures appeared through the smoke. They were tall, wearing layered armor in muted colors. Their helmets were smooth, visors dark. They moved with calm speed, covering angles, watching each other's positions without speaking. One of them raised an open hand toward the defenders, a simple gesture. Not a threat, not a command. A signal to hold. Behind them, more followed. Dozens. Then more still. The enemy tried to regroup, firing in panic. The humans responded instantly. Their weapons did not roar or blaze. They struck with short, sharp bursts. Enemy armor failed. Enemy lines collapsed. Jisoo watched in stunned silence. The humans did not charge wildly. They advanced step by step, clearing space, protecting the shelter entrance, as if it had always been theirs to defend. A human officer stepped forward and removed his helmet. His face was marked with dust and old scars. His eyes were steady. My name is Daniel Park, he said, his voice clear through the translator. We are here to help. The simplicity of the words struck harder than any speech. Taehyun lowered his weapon slowly. He realized his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release. He nodded once. Unable to speak. Human medics moved past the soldiers, kneeling beside the wounded without hesitation. They worked quickly, efficiently, treating aliens as if differences did not exist. Outside the shelter, the battle changed completely. Human ships moved with purpose, blocking escape paths, isolating enemy groups. Every attempt to regroup was cut short. The invading force, so certain hours before, now fought only to survive, On the surface, human soldiers spread out, pushing enemy units away from civilian zones. They took hits meant for others. They pulled trapped survivors from rubble under fire. Jisoo followed Daniel Park through the shelter corridors as systems were secured. He asked short questions, listened carefully, and adjusted plans without ego. There was no sense of control or command over the alliance. Only cooperation. She realized something important then. The humans were not surprised by the scale of destruction. They had expected it. They had come prepared. A final enemy broadcast cut through the noise, no longer calm. It was broken, filled with confusion and anger. It demanded explanation. It demanded to know who had given the humans authority to interfere. The response was brief. No one. They asked for help. That message spread faster than any weapon. As enemy forces began to retreat, human ships did not pursue blindly. They disabled engines, cut weapon systems, and let panic do the rest. Victory was achieved not through rage, but control. In the shelter, civilians slowly emerged from hiding. They stared at the armored figures with wide eyes. Some bowed. Others cried openly. A human soldier knelt to speak with a child, lowering his helmet so the translator could work clearly. The child laughed, a sound that felt almost forgotten. Jisoo stood near the entrance, watching the smoke clear from the streets outside. Fires were still burning, but now they were contained. The sky, though scarred, no longer felt hostile. Tae-hyun joined her. For the first time in many days, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. "They came," he said quietly. Jisoo nodded. Her voice trembled despite her effort to keep it steady. "Someone heard us." Above the planet, human ships held position, silent and watchful. They did not celebrate. They did not boast. They had come because hope was asked for, and now everything was changing. The fighting did not end all at once. It shifted like a storm changing direction. What had been chaos became order, and what had been fear became focus. Human soldiers moved through the city with steady purpose. They advanced in small groups, covering streets and buildings, pushing the enemy farther back with each careful step. They did not rush. They did not shout. Their calm was more unsettling to the enemy than any roar of rage. Jisoo watched from a command post that had been restored in hours. Screens showed clear images again. Data flowed smoothly. For the first time since the war began, the picture made sense. Enemy units were retreating in confusion. Their lines were broken. Their command signals were jammed or cut entirely. Some attempted to flee the planet, only to find human ships already waiting in orbit. Tae-hyun stood beside a human officer studying the same display. The officer spoke little, but every instruction he gave was precise. Tae-hyun realized that the humans were not reacting anymore. They were directing the battle. On the streets below, civilians emerged slowly from shelters and ruins. They watched the armored figures pass with disbelief. Some waved cautiously. Others simply stared, afraid that this moment might vanish if they acknowledged it. Human medics worked nonstop. They treated burns, fractures, and wounds without regard for species or rank. Their supplies seemed endless. Their hands never hesitated. Jisoo walked through a field hospital set up in what had once been a market square. She saw lives being pulled back from the edge, one after another. Each saved life felt like a small miracle. She stopped near a human medic named Soo-jin, who was helping a wounded defender sit upright. Soo-jin offered a tired smile and returned to her work without pause. There was no pride in her expression. Only duty. Above the city, the sky cleared as enemy aircraft were driven away. The constant thunder of bombardment faded into distant echoes. In its place came a strange quiet, broken only by the sounds of repair and movement. Enemy commanders attempted one final stand near the old capital district. They gathered their remaining forces and struck with desperation. The attack was fierce, but uncoordinated human forces met it head-on. The clash was short. Enemy weapons failed against layered defenses. Their formations collapsed under precise counter-movements. Within minutes, the last organized resistance fell apart. Taehyun watched the final exchange from a damaged tower. He felt no joy in the enemy's defeat, only relief that it was over. A message spread across all channels soon after. The invasion had ended. Remaining enemy forces were retreating or surrendering. The world was secure. Jisoo sat down for the first time in days and allowed herself to feel the weight of it. Her body shook, and she pressed her hands together to steady them. Survival was settling in slowly, like warmth returning to numb skin. Human engineers began repairing key systems almost immediately. Power grids were stabilized. Water systems restored. Temporary shelters expanded. The humans asked questions, not demands. What was needed? Where help should go first? Who was still missing? Jisoo realized then that humanity had not come to claim victory. They had come to restore balance. As night fell, the city glowed softly with restored lights. Fires were controlled. The air began to clear. For the first time in a long while, the stars were visible. Civilians gathered in open spaces, hesitant at first, then braver. Some shared food. Others told stories in low voices, testing the idea of tomorrow. Taehyun walked among them, his weapon finally slung across his back. Children followed him, curious and smiling. He smiled back, awkward and unused to the feeling. Jisoo stood beside Daniel Park on a raised platform overlooking the city. He watched the recovery in silence. "You came very far," she said at last. Daniel nodded. "We have learned what happens when no one comes." The words stayed with her. As reports arrived from other regions, it became clear that the humans had not only saved one world. Their arrival had disrupted enemy plans across the sector. Fleets were withdrawing. Fronts were collapsing. The war was not over everywhere, but it had changed direction. Human ships remained in orbit, quiet and steady. They did not leave immediately. They stayed until defenses were rebuilt, until supply lines were secure, until the fear in people's eyes began to fade. Jisoo looked across the city once more. Ruins remained. Loss remained. But hope, fragile and real, stood among them. The world had not been erased, because when all hope had seemed lost, humans had arrived, and the war itself had turned. Morning arrived slowly, as if the world was unsure, was allowed to continue. Pale light touched broken towers and patched streets. Smoke thinned, and the air felt lighter with each passing hour. Jisoo walked through the city with a small team, noting damage and progress. Repair crews worked beside human engineers, sharing tools and quiet instructions. There was no rush now, only steady movement forward. People greeted the soldiers as they passed. Some bowed. Some offered water or food. The humans accepted with simple thanks and moved on. They did not act like heroes. They acted like neighbors. Taehyun stood near a rebuilt checkpoint, watching traffic flow again. It was not much, only a few transports and walkers, but it felt like proof that life was returning. He spoke with human officers, sharing maps and local knowledge. The work felt natural, as if they had trained together for years. Across the city, shelters opened fully. Families stepped into the light, blinking and cautious. Children pointed at the sky, where human ships still held position. Silent and protective. Jisoo visited the data vault she had sealed during the final hours of the siege. With human help, it was opened safely. The records were intact. History had survived. She felt a deep relief settle in her chest. Even if nothing else had remained, this would have mattered. A gathering was called near the old council square. Leaders, officers, and representatives from many species arrived. Human commanders stood among them, not above them. Daniel Park spoke briefly. He thanked the defenders for holding as long as they had. He explained that human forces would remain until stability was certain, then withdraw. The world would govern itself. There was quiet surprise at that. Many had expected control or demands. None came. We came because you asked, Daniel said. We will leave when you no longer need us. The word spread quickly. In the days that followed, recovery continued. Enemy prisoners were secured and treated fairly. Supplies were distributed where they were needed most. Human doctors trained local medics, sharing methods and tools. Taehyun assisted with reorganizing defenses. Human tactics were studied and adapted, not copied blindly, but understood. Strength came from learning, not dependence. Jisoo spent long hours with human analysts, reviewing the war. Patterns emerged. The enemy had underestimated humanity, just as they had underestimated the Alliance. That mistake would not be repeated. Messages arrived from other worlds. News of the human arrival had spread faster than any fleet. Some worlds celebrated. Others watched with caution. One message stood out. A simple transmission from a distant colony, asking a single question. Are humans real? Jisoo smiled for the first time in weeks. As repairs neared completion, human ships began to depart one by one. Each departure felt heavier than expected. The sky seemed larger, emptier. Civilians gathered to watch the ships leave. There were no parades, only quiet respect. A child ran up to a human soldier and handed him a small, handmade token. The soldier knelt, accepted it, and promised to keep it safe. The child waved until the transport vanished into the clouds. Taehyun stood beside Jisoo as the last major ship prepared to jump away. The galaxy will remember this, he said. Jisoo nodded. So will we. Before leaving, Daniel Park met with them one final time. He shared a private channel, a simple frequency anyone could use. If you ever need help again, he said, send a call. Then the ship was gone. Weeks passed. The city rebuilt. Crops were planted. Trade routes reopened. Scars remained, but they no longer defined everything. Jisoo returned to her work as a strategist, now focused on protection instead of survival. Taehyun trained new officers, teaching them the value of patience and cooperation. At night, people gathered to tell the story, not of destruction, but of the moment the sky changed, of ships that arrived without warning, of soldiers who fought without hate. The story spread beyond the planet, then beyond the sector. Worlds that had never spoken now listened. Humanity became known not as conquerors, but as the ones who answered. Far away, in quiet space, human fleets moved on to other calls. Other worlds on the edge of losing hope. And on the once burning frontier world, under calm stars, people slept without fear, knowing that when all hope had been lost, someone had come and everything had changed.